Okay, I'm here to do a short book review on this book right here, Logical Fallacies Made Easy. This is published from the Genius Guides series, and the authors are just listed as a team at Idea Library. Okay, I'm going to try to keep I'm going to keep this within 30 minutes because this is going on uh my new channel, and partly I need to establish a bunch of videos that I can upload, which I think YouTube only allows under 30-minute videos for newbies. And then once I get like a bunch of views, then I can upload my longer videos, which is really my intent here, um, to transfer my philosophy related videos and make this my exclusive philosophy channel. All right, but so I thought I thought I'd kill two birds, maybe three birds with one stone. One, I want to bring book reviews uh to you guys, not that you guys are anybody specific. Um Two, it's a philosophy related book, so it's related to my content. And three, the logical fallacy I'm going to talk about here is going to be is prominent in um, one of my major philosophical essays that I'm going to introduce. So yeah, a lot going on, at least for me. So let me start here. So logical fallacies made easy. I'm gonna give you a taste of what you can expect to find in the book. I typed out the table of contents, and and I and I pretty much typed out the first example, the first fallacy, but I didn't print out everything. I think just for copyright's sake, but also because yeah, there's no need to show you everything. I think what I've given you is going to be a good enough taste, and then I'll just add commentary. Okay, so the book is called Logical Fallacies here, Made Easy. The table of contents looks like this. There's an introduction. It has the introduction and it says what are logical fallacies and why I learn about them. Okay. Then here we go. The meat of they divide this into six major chapters, and each chapter has like yeah subdivision. So what they are calling the distraction tactics, right? Tactics that steer you away from the topic, right? So they kind of like tangential stuff or kind of like lead you astray and make you forget exactly what you're supposed to be talking about, what you're supposed to be debating, or what was the point. Equivocation, and this is the one I'm going to talk about today more, but let's go. Equivocation. Equivocation is basically when you switch the meaning of a word, maybe from one meaning to another, because the primary meaning or the initial meaning that you use is not going to get you what you want later in your argument. It's not as strong as if as if it carried a secondary meaning, which which the person actually ends up using, hoping that the the people that they're arguing with don't notice this switch. Okay. By the way, some of these fallacies have different names. And sometimes I know the fallacy, but I don't know by the name used in this book. But equivocation is a pretty common name. False dilemma. A false dilemma is when you're given two choices. You're saying it's either this way or this way. Pick which one. And actually, maybe they're both not very attractive choices, or it doesn't matter. Maybe like there's just another option. Maybe there's a third option, or a fourth option, or a fifth option, or many options, but you're not being presented to them, and you're being presented uh, a choice as if these are the only two choices. Okay, so middle ground fallacy, a red herring fallacy. Red herring is very similar to straw man, and like sometimes it's very hard to determine when you get an example of a red herring versus an example of straw man to differentiate the two. But yeah, the most famous fallacy is straw man, where like you say you have a position and you state your position, and so that's your thesis. Let's say that's what you're arguing for, and then somebody else rephrases your position to something slightly different, something slightly like weaker or stronger sometimes, depending on which, and then they attack this rephrasing of your position, and they undermine that. and then everybody thinks they've undermined your argument, but they haven't. What's happened is they've undermined the rephrasing, the poor rephrasing or the inaccurate rephrasing of what you're stating, and so they defeat that, right? Right. So it's a straw man. It's not a real man. It's a straw man. Okay. Red herring is similar. Red herring is when you're thrown off the track. It's famously a red herring was like prisoners would rub red herring all over their bodies when they escape prison because the hounds would lose their scent that way. So that's the idea. But red herring and straw man are very similar. Second group, false appeals. Okay, so when you appeal, instead of arguing your point, instead of like, let's say you think like guns should be forbidden, gun ownership should be restricted or severely restricted or just taken away from Americans. Let's say you have this view, or let's say somebody's arguing that, and instead of arguing like sticking to that argument, sticking to the merits or demerits of like the Second Amendment, they have appeals to authority. They're like, well, this person said that guns were bad. And I'm like, okay. Or they have an appeal to consequences. Well, if we keep having guns, we're going to have more school shootings because that's just the nature of people to do these terrible things. And guns makes their actions more, I don't know, effective or dramatic or traumatic or like just greater. Appeals to emotion. Look, this little girl was killed by a gun. Her mother and her father are suffering. Don't you want to end their suffering? Ignorance, guns uh, are like ticking time bombs, and they cause 50% of the deaths in America. False. Or appeal to ignorance is more like the classic example of nobody knows this is true, so like nobody can say this is wrong, so it's true, right? Nobody knows that whether God does or doesn't exist. Nobody has proof that God doesn't exist, so God exists. Feels ignorant, something like that. That's not the greatest example, but it's going off the top of my head here. Appeals to nature. People think nature is good, so if it's natural, they think it's good, right? Like, right, you see this in like the food industry where people are selling you like organic food and they're like, oh, it's organic, so it's good for you. Yeah, but little do you know that it's worse for the planet, right? You're causing more harm to the planet growing natural products, especially when you want to feed the number of people that we want to feed, and especially when you think about the price cost. Yeah, so just because it's natural doesn't mean it's better than like artificial. Novelty, it's new, it's shiny. Don't you want it? Pity, feel sorry. Popularity, everybody's doing it, right? So these are all uh, fallacies. I'm not going to. I don't want to go too deeply into this. This is not an explanation of logical fallacy so much as showing you what you can expect in the book. Okay, and appeals to tradition, yeah, because people are kind of like proud and nostalgic about their tradition. So if you appeal to their tradition, they're gonna favor what you're saying, even though you are really off topic. Link leaps. Correlation versus causation. This is a famous example. Just because B happens every time A happens doesn't mean that A causes B. Right? This is the causation versus relation. Um, uh, yeah. Example. Gambler's fallacy. Post hoc ergo propter hoc, which is like after the fact you come up with something, right, to explain it, but it's only after the fact. You didn't have any explanatory power before, but it's kind of like you're just making it up as you go along. Logical traps, begging the question, circular reasoning, very common. This is very common actually. People seem to like do this all the time without realizing it. Um, yeah, you're just begging the question. You're actually just re you're just restating your conclusion. You're not even arguing, you're not even giving reasons for your conclusion. You're just restating in a different way or like in a more forceful way, not logically, but forceful in some other way. And then the burden of proof, like, okay, when somebody makes a claim, like like if you say God exists and then you ask me to prove that he doesn't, like I don't have the burden of proof. I didn't make the claim, right? You made the claim God exists, so where's the evidence? What's your argument? You can't throw it onto me and say, well, prove that he doesn't. I don't have the burden of proof. Personal attacks. This is also very common. Personal attack ad hominem means against the person. So instead of saying like, so let's say some guy is defending, again, the Second Amendment, and you're like, well, this guy is a child molester. He's a proven child molester. He's also a criminal. He's got a record. So like, why should we believe what he has to say? Yeah, but you're just attacking his character. You're not attacking his actual argument. And his argument could be excellent. His argument could be extremely cogent. But and obviously you knowing that, let's say you don't want to tackle his argument because you can't defeat his argument. So you attack him, making yeah. This is typically in politics. This happens. Genetic fallacy. No True Scotsman is a famous one. Tu quoque. Tu quoque is the U, also called U2. Like, so if your parents say don't smoke because it's bad for you, and you're like, but you smoke. Yeah, yeah. So you do it too, right? You do it too. So just because somebody does something doesn't mean like that's an argument against, that's not an argument for why that thing is good to do or bad to do, right? So like if your parents were like, experimented with drugs when they were younger, and they had a rough time, they suffered the consequences of drug abuse, let's say, and then they have kids, and then they tell you don't do drugs, like you can't do drugs, it's very bad for you, and you're like, and then you point out to them that they did it, and you're like, you're hypocrites, you did it. Like, no, that's not hypocrisy, right? That's not hypocrisy. That they learned a valuable lesson in life, and they're trying to steer you straight. And they're saying that there's very bad consequences when it comes to drug use, and they're right. And so you cannot undermine that argument that they're right about the terrible consequences of drug use by saying, "But you did drugs," right? Okay. Um, by the way, some of these, even though they're called fallacies, some versions of them are not fallacies, right? Some versions of them are not fallacies. Like if a guy is giving, if, let's say some person is arguing something, and he's a known liar, and he's lied many times for self-serving purposes, and then you point out like here in this case, in this time he lied about this because he's trying to gain advantage about this, and this other time he lied about this, and so we shouldn't believe him. That's not a fallacy, right? You're giving examples of him being a known liar. And so in this occasion, like he should have no credibility, or his credibility should be severely diminished. So ad hominem against the person doesn't necessarily make it a fallacy, right? It just, I mean, yeah, it's the name of a fallacy, but if you attack a person's character for some, or you attack his history, you attack the person in some kind of way, it doesn't mean it's a fallacy. It depends on context, right? And we'll see. We'll talk about this one here when we get to slippery slope. Um, and also, yeah, 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 slippery slope. Okay, the last one, no, yeah, the last section he calls stretching the truth. Anecdotal fallacy, where you give like, where you're like, let's say you got like mugged by like a Mexican guy, and you're like, oh, Mexicans are like criminals. It's like, I know because, I was robbed last week, and maybe I've been robbed twice, and both times they were Mexican. Yeah, but that's just a small sample size, right? Like, yeah, sure, we understand why maybe you have a bad opinion about Mexicans, or maybe why you are like weary of Mexicans now. But it's an anecdotal fallacy that you're generalizing way too much, right? It's like a generalization fallacy. Composition fallacy, division fallacy. Composition and division are the opposites of each other. Um, false analogy. False analogy. Let me say something about false analogy. False people tend to think that analogies are arguments. They're not. There's such a thing as called arguing by analogy, but analogies are not arguments. They are not evidence for anything. An analogy is just your way of stating something that you probably cannot state without the analogy. So if you're trying to explain something to someone, and what you're trying to explain is hard to explain, then you're like, wait. I'm going to use an analogy that this person of something that this person understands. Maybe the analogy is marriage. Maybe the analogy is baking a cake. And you're like, oh, this person knows what goes into baking a cake. This person has experience being married. And so I'm going to use that and then say the characteristics that pertain to marriage or the characteristics that pertain to baking a cake, those apply in this one thing that I'm having a hard time to explain. And then the person will be like, "Oh, okay, 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 I get it, I get it," or "I kind of get it, I get it, I kind of get it." Okay, but that's not an analogy that the first thing has those characteristics. Like, how did you argue that the first thing has characteristics A, B, and C? Like, you didn't. All you said is that marriage has characteristics A, B, and C. Okay, I agree. Or you said that baking a cake has characteristics A, B, and C. Okay, I agree. And then, but now you're saying, and so this thing has A, B, and C. Like, wait, where did the and so come from? That's not an, you have no argument. You're just saying that it does, but it's not an argument. Anyway, but false analogy again. People tend to think analogies are arguments. So when they give an analogy like this thing is like this, but sometimes the analogy doesn't even fit. It's not even a good analogy, let alone let's forget about whether it's an argument or not. Okay. False equivalence, obviously saying this thing is like this thing, but they're not. Hasty generalization, I already talked about it. Like you see a small sample size and then you generalize it to all of them or to most of them. And slippery slope. Slippery slope is when you say, look, if we do this, it's going to lead to this, and that's going to lead to this, and then it's going to lead to this terrible thing. That's a slippery slope. Going from this like relatively benign act to some major catastrophe because of the steps you think are going to happen, it's going to lead cause causal effect, and then boom, that's a slippery slope argument. It's but it's not a slippery slope if you stop short of the catastrophe. If you say, for example, uh, look, let's say we open the borders like the Biden administration did, it's going to lead to it's going to lead to an increased level of illegal immigrants, which seems natural, and it happened. And that's going to lead to more people getting trafficked, more women getting raped, more children being abducted, and that happened. And so, like, and then you go down the line like this, and like, that's not a slippery slope, right? Those are very reasonable assumptions to make. Forget whether it's history happened, forget the Biden administration stuff. Just those are very reasonable assumptions to make. And so if you don't stop short of and then America is going to crumble, like, okay, no, that's the slippery slope, right? If you say, okay, and that's going to like undermine, well, it can undermine it to about what level, but if it's like it's going to like, yeah, it's going to make America a third world country, let's say. That's the final argument. Like, no, that's a slippery slope, right? Okay. But in itself, like saying one thing is going to lead to another and lead to another. That's not a slippery slope fallacy. Okay. Um. So let me, and then they have some concluding remarks. I don't know what they are. I haven't read them. Uh. Let me show you Let me show you what you expect to get. So by the way, this book. Let me jump to the end here. Um. In the back of the book, it tells you you're going to get 30 common fallacies. Those are the ones I just read out. 30. Um. And so these are some of the most common ones. I wouldn't say all of the most common ones, or like not the top 30, but they're pretty common, like pretty useful. Um, Everyday examples. I'm going to show you one. I'm going to show you the equivocation one, what they do, and then they also have advice about how you can respond to them. This advice is always just like my advice is just to identify the fallacy. Like, say, hey, this is an equivocation. You did this and then point it out. Or like say, oh, this is a slippery slope. This is what you're doing. If you just point out the fallacy, name the fallacy, and like then that's enough to undermine the argument. Okay, but they have their own advice. But again, I don't really like. It's not something I would read here. Okay, so let's go. Let's see what they. This is not everything that they have to say on the equivocation fallacy, but it's the most important thing. Okay, so the equivocation fallacy, which they give a subtitle of shortcut logic. Imagine that you're in a debate with someone about whether dogs make good pets. You say dogs are loyal companions. The other person responds with, but loyalty can be dangerous. Look at how people blindly follow their leaders, and it leads to trouble. And they're right, right? Loyal. Some people have like a loyalty to the degree where they just do whatever their leaders say, and sometimes their leaders are bad leaders, or they lead them to terrible things. And so there's nothing wrong with this statement. It's wrong in this argument. It's wrong in this argument because it's a different kind of loyalty. So here's the response and here's the explanation. It says, hold on. When you said dogs are loyal, you weren't talking about the same kind of loyalty that can cause problems in politics. This mix-up is a perfect example of the equivocation fallacy. And then they explain the equivocation fallacy to you. The equivocation fallacy occurs when someone uses a word or phrase in a misleading way by switching between different meanings of the word during an argument. They're basically playing with the word's meaning to make their point seem stronger or to confuse the issue. It's like pulling a verbal trick, using the same word to mean different things in different parts of the argument, without clarifying that the meaning has changed. This can make an argument seem logical on the surface, or at least more powerful, even though it's actually based on a sneaky switch in meaning. Okay, now they're going to give you 3 examples of equivocation in use in a debate, in advertising, and in everyday life. And then so we'll go over these. Some of these are more helpful than others, but it's still good because you're getting. It's one thing to understand the meaning. Like it's one thing to understand the definition of equivocation here, but it's another thing to identify it. And that's the goal. You want to identify it in an argument. When you hear it or when you see it written, you want to be able to say, hey, that's an equivocation fallacy. So then I have reason not to believe, or yeah, so then you can judge more accurately how strong this argument is. Okay, so in a debate, suppose someone argues evolution can't be true because it's just a theory. This is not a good argument, by the way. Like this is a terrible argument. Not that it can't be true, but let's say evolution is unlikely to be true because it's just a theory. It's a stronger argument when you say unlikely because it's harder to defeat. That it's like can't be true is easy to defeat, but unlikely to be true is harder to defeat. The weaker your claim, the harder it is to defeat it, right? Like if I say all women are smarter than men, you're like, I just have to bring up one man who's smarter than one woman, and I've defeated your argument. But if I say most women are smarter than most men, that's harder to do. That's harder to undermine. And if I say 20% of women are smarter than 80% of men, like, okay. Like, can you even think about how you're going to defeat that? Right? So the weaker the claim, the harder it is to defeat. Anyway, evolution can't be true. Strong claim. Because it's just a theory. And theories are just guesses. Yeah, but guesses can be true. Right? You can have a correct guess, right? Like how many coins are in my pocket, and you guess 10 without having any kind of evidence, and then I pull out and count 10, right? So okay. So this is not the best phrasing. They're not doing the best job they can here to give your opponent. Like this is like Plato with his interlocutor, where he makes his interlocutor say the dumbest things, and then he just defeats them easily. Anyway, evolution can't be true because it's just a theory, and theories are just guesses. And so the explanation is that here the word theory is used in 2 different ways. In science, a theory is a well-substantiated explanation, right? There's a lot to be said for this theory. There's a lot of evidence lending credibility to this theory, to the fact that it very likely seems to be true. Think about gravity. Gravity is a theory. It's just a theory. But we take it for granted. It's almost like a truism, or it's like a fact. Like it would be like nobody doubts gravity, the theory of gravity, how gravity works. But it is just a theory, and so to say that it's just a theory, so it can't be true, that's ridiculous. Unlikely to be true. That even that seems like a little bit yeah, a bit much to say. But the argument treats it as a mere guess, which is misleading, right? So that's what they're saying. Okay, but again, a mere guess can be correct. Okay, so that's one. This is not the best explanation. This is not the best example of equivocation, where the equivocation is on a theory. Okay, next. This is a better one, I think. In advertising, imagine a commercial that says you need a natural boost to start your day, so try our drink. It's the most natural choice. Right? So here the equivocation is on natural choice. Natural. Because you might think, as they explain here, the word natural could just suggest it's made from pure ingredients. But in advertising, it often just refers to something minimally related to nature without clear evidence of its pure ingredient. But here, there is no relation to nature here. Not necessarily. It's just the most our drink is the most natural choice. Like anybody can say that, right? Like Coca-Cola can say when you're having a hamburger and a Coke, Coca-Cola is the most natural choice. There's no allusion or reference to nature here. So we use the word natural in different ways, but this company initially said it's a natural boost, meaning obviously uh, related to nature, pure ingredients, no artificial ingredients. But then they use our natural choice, right? So, okay. So here, natural boost and natural choice, they're not, they're meant to give the idea that the ingredients are pure, but not necessarily. It's just another way of using the word natural. Okay, so equivocation. This is a good one. Advertising is a good way to study logical fallacies because those guys avail themselves of all the logical fallacies because they work and people fall for them. So people are susceptible to them. So they get away with lying to you without technically lying to you. Well, I think they're lying to you, but they're just falling back on the fact that these are different ways that you can use language. Everyday life, example. Suppose a friend says, I have the right to say what I want, so you shouldn't criticize me. Right? This is common, um, especially when you have political opinions. Here, the word right is being used in two different senses. The legal right, the freedom of speech, and being free from criticism. The friend is confusing having the right to speak with being right in what they say, or avoiding any feedback leading to a misleading. Right? So yes, you have the right to say, like, this is the same thing where people say, like, all people are equal. Yes, in a legal sense, all people are equal. But you and I are not equal, right? One of us is smarter than the other. One of us knows more about philosophy than the other. One of us knows more about fixing cars than the other. One of us knows more about computers than the other. One of us is taller than the other. One of us is better looking than the other. Right? One of us earns more money than the other. One of us works longer hours than the other. One of us went to college more than the other. One of us, like, we're not equal in most regards, and that's a beautiful thing. But like everybody should earn the same money because we're all equal. No, that's ridiculous. Right? Okay. So here the equivocation is on a right to say. Right? Yeah, you're right to say you do have a legal right to say what you want, like in a certain total limit, right? Even freedom of speech has a limit. Um, but that doesn't mean you are free from criticism. You might be free from condemnation, like or physical attack. Otherwise, you wouldn't really have a right to say, a legal right to say. You can't say you have a legal right to say, and then you're going to get punished by death, right? No, but you're not free from people of criticizing your opinion, right? You're not free from people undermining your opinion. You're not free from people showing you to be an ignoramus for saying what you said, right? No, you're not free from that. Anyway, but this person is like, yes, you can't criticize me, right? I am free from that. No, you're not. You do have a right to say that's the legal right. That does not include freedom from criticism. Okay, so you get three examples, and that's it. That's what you're gonna get for 30. It's a fairly good job. They kind of like they don't dumb it down, but they kind of do dumb it down. They simplify things in a good way, not like don't take the expression dumb down in a negative way. They simplify things for you, so for the layman can like understand uh, these fallacies. They give you pretty like their examples are not like the best examples, but they do a good enough job to for someone new to these fallacies to understand them. And then later, more subtle, more sophisticated versions you might do with another book, or some other kind of study of logical fallacies, which I highly recommend everybody to do. This is the most common fallacies that people make in their thinking, in their reasoning. Formal fallacies are rare. Yeah. Anyway, so that's it. That's the book. Um, I recommend it if you're new to logical fallacies. Um, and yeah. All right. Thanks. I'm going to click off. Hopefully I kept this under 30 minutes. Let's